If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. For it is better to lose one part of your body than for your entire body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better to lose one part of your body than for your entire body to go into hell. Matthew chapter 5, verses 29 to 30. This verse is a tough one from the Sermon on the Mount, especially because skeptics and non-believers love to cherry pick this verse to try to invalidate Christianity. They'll say, oh, Jesus says to cut off your hand or to gouge out your eye. Therefore, Christianity is bad. Really? So first of all, let's look at a little bit of the context here. Jesus is specifically talking about lust. In Matthew 5:28, he's speaking about how if you look at a woman even with lustful intent, you've committed adultery within your heart, thus implying that certain actions, certain thoughts, and certain desires can lead us into sin. This reminds us that if we can't control our thoughts, we can be led astray. The imagery he presents with the body parts is a metaphor. Each body part represents maybe a thought, a person, a habit, a thing that leads us into sin repetitively over and over again. This is absolutely not literal. And he's painting the image because eyes and hands are indispensable. They're essential to being a human being. And if you cut them off and live without them, sure, you can live without them. You can physically live without them, but it becomes incredibly difficult, or at least that's how it seems. Because a lot of the time, when you cut off habits and things and people that lead you into sin, it can seem like they're indispensable. It can seem like they're essential to your well-being, to your happiness. But in reality, Jesus is saying, if it leads you into sin, cut it off because you can live without it. This is an extremely wise word to apply in your life. If something is causing you to sin, don't just whittle it down. Don't just regulate it. Don't just cut it down a little bit. You should completely cut it off to stop yourself from being tempted to fall into sin. Keeping any of these things around can potentially perpetuate our sin and cause us to perpetually live in a state of sin where we keep doing the same one over and over again. While this passage is mainly focused on lust, it can be expanded into other things. Jesus uses very radical hyperbole here to illustrate an image that is radical. We sometimes have to make radical changes in our lives in order to stop falling into sin. For example, if you're dating somebody and you keep giving into your lust, you may have to end the relationship. You may have to move out. You may have to distance yourself from that person. It seems like you can't live without them. It seems like it's radical. But if you're trying to walk with the Lord, these sacrifices do have to be made. None of these approaches that you take to repetitive sin should be violent, but instead they should be loving and understanding of other people. But you must abandon these things that maybe you think are essential to your life because they're not actually helping you at all. Again, I'll reiterate, the eye and the hand are both metaphors. Jesus is saying that if XYZ leads you into sin, then cut it off. Don't just whittle it down. Don't just regulate it. Completely cut it off. Keeping things around that lead you into sin is the pathway to destruction. Jesus is saying that it's better to cut these things off in your life and suffer the consequences, maybe the feeling of loss of that thing being cut off, instead of spending an eternity apart from God. Again, what I find interesting about these verses is that people will say, oh, Jesus says to gouge out your eye and cut off your hand, therefore he's evil and Christianity is bad. Really? You have to read into these things. Jesus spoke in metaphor for a reason, and it's not because he's some super righteous, cryptic being that wants to be self-important. Although he is important and he is righteous, what he's doing is giving us the free will to either accept and understand his teachings or to reject and warp his teachings. See, the people that weaponize these verses against Christians are taking them literally. They're choosing not to interpret it in the metaphorical way that Jesus intended us to, because they're already in the mindset of rejecting Jesus. Therefore, it's pretty predictable that they'll use every possible excuse, every possible interpretation of the Bible to make Jesus look bad. So don't let anyone knock down your faith by cherry-picking these verses and taking them literally. I hope this video helped. Follow the call to Christ, defend the faith, and God bless.